Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Before we dive into today's stories, I wanted to share some exciting news. Many of you know my cats, Disney and Dexter. Well, Dexter is competing in a contest, and he needs lots of likes to win the popular vote. If you'd like to help Dexter, please visit my community page or check the pinned comments for the contest's Facebook link and give his picture a like. Your help means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Now let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My older sister, let's call her Mia, and our mom have always had a rocky relationship for as long as I can remember. Mia has always been assertive and inquisitive, while our mom was a traditional, devout Christian who prioritized family above all else. Some background: Mom was the second eldest of 7 children who immigrated from Vietnam to the U.S. She grew up in poverty in a small village and experienced firsthand the challenges of caring for a large family. She was the first in her family to graduate college and always saw education as the key to escaping poverty. She funded college for 3 of her siblings. Only 2 actually finished and found jobs, and also paid for several of her nieces and nephews to attend good schools in Vietnam. Mia had more exposure to our extended family than I did. She was born in Vietnam. I was born in the U.S. We're 6 years apart. As she got older, she vocally disagreed with Mom financially supporting some relatives, feeling they were taking advantage of Mom's generosity, especially since Mom was frugal with our expenses here in the U.S. During Mia's senior year of high school in 2015, she had a major falling out with Mom and moved out. They didn't speak for 4 years, though Dad and I stayed in touch with Mia. During that time, Mia worked full-time and put herself through college without any help from our parents. Fast forward to my high school graduation in 2019, I invited Mia, she came, and she ended up reconciling with Mom. Things were still tense, but their relationship improved significantly. In early 2022, Mom passed away. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Mia had quietly taken over the continued financial support for Mom's youngest sister, Lynn, covering her living expenses and maintaining a college fund for Lynn's daughter. Mia also handled the funeral arrangements and estate management. Dad was a wreck at the time. Last December, Mia and I decided to spend the holidays in Vietnam. One of our visits was to Lynn's place. Little did I know that all hell was about to break loose when we sat down for dinner. After some small talk, the topic of Mom came up, and this was how that conversation went. Some details might be lost in translation, so I'm just writing the gist. M. Mia. L. Lynn. L. It's such a tragedy that your mother passed away. We'll miss her dearly. M. Yes, it is. L. Mia, why did you stop talking to her? Why did you leave? You should be ashamed. That's not how you treat family. Now, your mom could have raised you better. You were always too headstrong, you know. That's not ladylike. You shouldn't be so aggressive. You need to be softer. How are you going to find a husband otherwise? M. Silent. L. Turning to me. Don't be like your sister, okay? Be a good daughter. Do you have a boyfriend yet? You don't want to end up too old like Mia and not have your own family. That's not following God's plan. Before I could respond, Mia interjected with her own questions. M. Lynn, why did you drop out and decide to get pregnant when Mom was paying for your college? Did you really think that businessman would leave his wife for you? If you wanted to be a trophy wife, you should have just said so instead of wasting Mom's hard-earned money. At this point, I decided to sit back and watch because Lynn was starting to irritate me, and Mia has a reputation for epic takedowns. L. Enraged. How dare you come into my house, eat my food, and disrespect me? M. Calmly. Technically, it's Mom's house. You have food because Mom has been supporting you for over a decade. You disrespected her by wasting all the opportunities she worked hard to give you. L. I don't need your attitude or your nonsense. I don't need anything from you, you disrespectful brat. Get out of my house right now. M. Standing up with a smile. Are you sure you don't need anything from me? You don't want anything from me. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. L. I don't need a damn thing from you. I can take care of myself and my family. How dare you imply otherwise? Get out of my house this instant, and your father will hear about this. M. Looking at me. You heard her. Let's go. I was surprised by how calmly Mia was handling the tirade because I've witnessed her and Mom get into massive shouting matches before. More confused than anything, I followed her to the car. M. You heard her, right? She doesn't need anything from me. Me, as realization dawns. Yeah. M. Okay then. We returned to the hotel and Mia promptly canceled the automatic transfer of funds to Lynn's account. We then spent the rest of the week lounging on the beach and hanging out with other cousins. Just yesterday, I was chatting with one of my cousins and learned that Lynn is only now realizing the consequences of running out of money. I called Mia shortly after to give her an update. M. What? She ran out of money that quickly? There was enough in there to last her the year. Me. Oh, did you tell her that? M. Basic math. Me. Will she lose the house? M. Nah, it's paid for. As long as she doesn't do something stupid, she should have a roof over her head. Me. Did you also close her kid's college fund? M. Nope. I'm not going to punish the kid for her mom's stupidity, but that's all she gets, so if she messes it up, she messes it up. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how this plays out in the coming months. I have a feeling my sister probably won't give a damn one way or the other, though. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be dealing with homeowner association drama out here in the countryside, but boy was I wrong. This is the story of how my neighbor Karen tried to bulldoze my bridge and take over part of my farm, and how I fought back and came out on top. Some background: I inherited my grandpa's old farm about 5 years ago. It's a beautiful 50-acre property with rolling hills, a creek running through it, and lots of space for my horses. The farm's been in my family for generations. When I first moved in, the only other houses nearby were a few other old farmhouses spread out over hundreds of acres. But in the last couple years, a fancy new subdivision started going up on the land next door. I wasn't thrilled about having new neighbors so close, but I figured live and let live. That's when I met Karen. She and her husband were one of the first to move into the new development. Right away, Karen started making comments about how my dirty old farm was an eyesore next to their pristine new neighborhood. She'd come over uninvited to lecture me about my unkempt lawn. It was a hayfield, or complain that my horses were too loud. I mostly ignored her and went about my business. But things came to a head last spring when I decided to rebuild the old wooden bridge over the creek. The original bridge my grandpa built had finally rotted through, and I needed a way to get my tractor across to the backfields. I hired a contractor, and we got to work building a simple but sturdy new bridge. We were almost done when Karen showed up in a rage, waving around some papers. "You can't build that monstrosity here," she screeched. "This creek is part of our homeowner association's common areas. You're violating our bylaws." I was confused. "Ma'am, this creek and bridge are on my property. They have nothing to do with your homeowner association." Karen's face turned red. "No, you're mistaken. When they developed our neighborhood, they acquired the rights to this creek as a water feature. You need to remove this bridge immediately." I tried to calmly explain that the creek was well within my property lines and showed her the original deed, but Karen wouldn't listen. She stormed off, threatening to call her lawyers. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I came home from running errands to find an enormous bulldozer parked by my bridge. Karen was there with a work crew, gleefully directing them to tear down my brand new bridge. I ran over shouting for them to stop. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is my property!" Karen smirked. "Not anymore, it isn't. Our homeowner association board voted and we're annexing this creek into our community. Your ugly bridge has to go." I was speechless. These people had lost their minds if they thought they could just steal my land. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, half my bridge was already destroyed. The cops made everyone leave while they sorted things out. Karen smugly told them she had paperwork proving the creek belonged to their homeowner association now. I knew it was bull, but it would take time to prove. For the next few weeks, it was a constant battle. Karen and her homeowner association cronies kept trying to bring equipment onto my land. They put up signs claiming it as homeowner association property. They even started planning a walking trail along my creek. I got lawyers involved, but the legal process was slow. Meanwhile, I couldn't access half my fields without the bridge. I was losing money every day this dragged on. Fed up, I decided to do some digging of my own. I spent hours at the county records office, poring over old deeds and surveys. And then I found it, Karen's smoking gun. Turns out, when the developers bought the land for the new subdivision, they actually shaved off a 50-foot strip of my property by mistake. The true boundary line ran right through Karen's fancy new back patio. Armed with this info, I had my lawyer draw up a notice demanding they remove all structures from my land immediately. Karen and her husband would need to tear out a big chunk of their $50,000 patio and landscaping. You should have seen Karen's face when I served her those papers. She turned white as a ghost. "There must be some mistake," she sputtered. "We bought this land fair and square." I smiled. "Well, Karen, looks like you were right about someone's property lines being wrong, just not in the way you thought." The homeowner association's lawyer obviously realized they had no leg to stand on. Within days, they dropped all claims to my creek. They even offered to pay for rebuilding my bridge and cover all my legal fees if I would agree not to enforce the true property line. As satisfying as it would have been to bulldoze Karen's patio, I decided to be the bigger person. I agreed to their offer on the condition that they sign a legal document acknowledging my full property rights and agreeing to leave me alone. It took a few more weeks, but I finally got my new bridge rebuilt. This time, Karen and her homeowner association buddies didn't dare say a word. The best part? I found out later that Karen had been the one pushing the homeowner association board to try to take my land. She wanted to put in a pool and needed more space. Her scheme backfired spectacularly, and she ended up costing the homeowner association a fortune in legal fees and construction costs. Last I heard, the homeowner association voted her off the board, and she's persona non grata in the neighborhood now. Karma's a beautiful thing sometimes, so that's how I took on a hostile homeowner association and won. The moral of the story, don't mess with a farmer who knows his land. These days, things are peaceful again on my little farm. My horses graze happily by the creek. I can get my tractor where it needs to go, and my property lines are safe and sound. As for Karen, I hear she's planning to move. Can't say I'll miss her. The next one is a petty revenge story. My 40M, almost 4-year-old daughter loves grocery shopping with me, especially if we get one of those race car grocery carts. If it's a slow time at the store, I take her to the deli, where there is a wide open space in the corner, and spin a circle with the cart. She loves it. It usually gathers smiles in the rare case someone is nearby. Just a dad having fun with his daughter, right? Just yesterday, after doing a single spin, we went on our way when an older lady, I'd say early 70s, came towards us, shaking her head and glaring at us. I gave her a perplexed look in response to her scowl, and she muttered something about having absolutely no respect for public spaces. I responded, "Sorry, ma'am, I was just having fun with my child. Sorry to have offended you. Have a nice day." I thought that was that and was happy to move on, but she continued. Shame on you for teaching your child such poor manners. I taught my children how to behave in public. Me, clearly that's a lesson you didn't bother to learn yourself. I wonder how well they turned out. Muttered something about them being perfect. My almost 4-year-old is extremely perceptive and sensitive, and asked if she had done something wrong. I then explained as loud as I could, Me, absolutely not, honey. That's just a very grumpy old bully. She angrily responded, I am not grumpy. I just want to be left alone. Me, with my stern face. No? Well, you certainly are a bully then, and if you want to be left alone, I strongly suggest you start minding your own ducking business. You taught your children to behave in stores. I'm teaching mine to stand up to bullies like you. Thank you for this perfect teaching moment. She finally caught the hint to shut her trap and moved along, still muttering and shaking her head. Petty revenge commences. Twice more we encountered her in the other aisles, and I made sure to overdo the race car theme, but would abruptly stop when we got near her, saying loudly to my daughter, Careful now, honey, we don't want to anger the fun police. And my daughter played along perfectly. As fate would have it, we were approaching the checkout at nearly the same time. We got there first, but I magnanimously allowed her in front of us to be first in line at the solitary manned checkout, knowing she would complain, and she did not disappoint. She immediately started to explain to the till person that she was harassed by me and my daughter this whole time and how we were disrupting the whole store. The till lady cautiously looked over at me and I just gave a totally confused shrug. I'm still in my formal work clothes, suit and tie, and my daughter is wearing her adorable poofy fairy skirt, picture-perfect innocence. Having obviously seen me let the lady in front of us in line, the till person gave me an apologetic smile and just nodded and smiled, humoring Karen. She must have tried complaining further at customer services because we were now leaving at the same time, despite our full grocery cart, a child insisting on helping with the bagging. Once outside, I made sure to drag race that cart past her as loud and as obnoxiously as I could, and my daughter squealed in delight. I didn't even bother looking back at that crusty old idiot. She ruined my shopping outing. I hope I ruined her entire day. I do feel bad for people that are this desperately miserable, but I also have zero patience for them taking it out on other people, just trying to enjoy a sliver of joy in their day. I think if enough of us consistently confront people like this, they might just learn to keep their mouths shut and their poor attitudes to themselves. Mandatory edit, formatting, gratitude, and trolls. No content edits. Thanks for all the fatherhood props, made my day. And thanks for all the new grocery store shenanigans tips. Can't wait to bring joy to hundreds of people while pissing off one. My mind is blown about the people defending this lady, labeling me the bully, and shaming my parenthood. They're just trolls, right? Please say they're trolls. Shame to say it worked, though. I responded to them. I failed. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This is a story from my first job as a paperboy at 13. Even at a young age, I was always a bit of a nightmare to manage. As soon as there was any show of any unfair treatment, I've always made it my mission to know all the regulations and work only within them. If an employer shows no flexibility to me, they sure as hell aren't getting any back from me. On the story, it was a great first job. My round started just round the corner from my house, and a small loop left my last delivery 3 doors down from my home. There were usually no complaints about time. I used to show up just after 7, pack my bags, and all the papers were delivered by 7:45, even on the busiest day. We had a new manager start at the shop, and apparently there were some people complaining that their papers were not delivered early enough. We were told we had to be in the shop for 6:30 going forwards. In the UK, there are regulations on when a child is allowed to work, and given this new change, and how it was a deterrent to my life, I started to research to see if anything could be done. I found out 2 things. Firstly, minors could not work before 7 a.m., and secondly, you could not deduct money from wages for mistakes, something that was happening regularly every time there was a customer complaint. Armed with this information, I told the manager what he was proposing, and his current way of running the deliveries was illegal, and he needed to come up with a better plan. I am not sure he liked being told this by a 13-year-old, so he fired me immediately. The news agents in question was a national chain, so I wrote to their head office detailing the situation and what I intended to do next. I stated that they were not following child labor laws and I would report to the relevant agency. I pointed out it wasn't a great look that when this was brought to their attention I was fired and nothing changed. I stated that I intended to raise a legal claim for unfair dismissal based on the nature of my dismissal. I also gave them notice of my intent to go to the press to see if they felt there was a story to a national brand ignoring child labor laws and dismissing someone who brought that to their attention. I asked for a response in 30 days or I would start to make the appropriate arrangements. Well, it took 2 weeks before I was asked to come into a meeting with my ex-branch manager and his boss. I took my dad as a witness, but he encouraged me to lead the meeting. There was some backpedaling. They stated they had made changes. We were now expecting in at 6:45 to do the sorting before going on our deliveries at 7 o'clock. They had given everyone a pay rise and a bonus, which would be paid weekly if no mistakes were made. They offered me my job back. I refused. I told them, while the pay situation seemed fair, they were still asking people to come in before 7 a.m. And this was against the law. I stated if they didn't want me to take this further, they needed us to be there at 7 a.m. and they could get our bags ready for delivery, or we could be there at 7 and be out for delivery at 7:15. The choice was theirs, but their interpretation of the law was wrong, and I wouldn't back down on my actions unless changes were made. They agreed to my points, and then as part of my job be reoffered, there was a confidentiality clause. I stated I was not comfortable with this, and if this was to buy my silence from approaching the press, there would be a cost attached to it. In the end, I got my job back 20% raise for everyone working the same job and a weekly bonus on top. A strict 7 a.m. start time, and to top it all, £500 to sign the confidentiality clause. Moral of the story, make sure whoever you are trying to duck over isn't a petty little crap who is willing to put more time and effort into ruining you than he is at school. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I, 31F, am in shock over the throwdown that I witnessed between my mom, 60s F, and my entitled brother, 26M. Bro has been mooching off of my mom and I. She and I co-own our house since 2017. He lived rent-free for 4 years. Finally, my mom managed to force him to pay his form of rent by paying some utility bills, a total of about $450 a month since 2021. He has never paid his bills willingly. Every month he demands to know why he has to pay the amount and demands proof of the cost, as if my mom was trying to swindle him for some reason. And every time he has finally given us the money for the bills, he has told us he was bailing us out since we must be broke. Why else would we be making him pay for us? Recently, he has been going off about how he can't wait to leave the house and he wants to save his money to move out, but he simply can't with the cost of all these bills weighing him down. My mother told him since he is so serious about moving out, she will gladly pay for his portion of the bills. She works seasonally, and all he would need to pay was his car insurance. She said she would give him until May 31st to save up as much as he could. He would then need to move out. Since that agreement was made, Entitled Bro has gone on 2 trips out of state. One was a 4-day bachelor party in New Orleans. Has gone to poker nights with his friends multiple times, refuses to so much as wash a dish, and leaves a greasy mess wherever he goes in the house. Meanwhile, my mom has worked 6 days a week to make enough money to cover his expenses. And yet, Entitled Bro hasn't thanked her once. Every time she asks him to do the simplest task, he ignores her or claims he forgot, despite how often she reminds him. Today, she finally snapped. His one bill that he's responsible for was due 4 days ago, and he never paid her. She texted him and reminded him verbally many times. She asked via text one last time today, and he finally responded by asking her to give him a receipt so she can prove his insurance cost what she claimed it cost, and he never sent the money. She lost it and said she is sick of catering to him without so much as a thank you. She said she wants peace, and he is no longer worth the trouble she goes through. She said she is removing him from the car insurance tomorrow and that he no longer has until the end of May to move out. He has 3 weeks. That's it. She's threatened to kick him out before and hasn't gone through with it yet, but this time felt different because I have never seen her go nuclear like that before, and Entitled Bro must have felt that same way because he went through the 5 stages of grief about 100 times during that fight. He screamed, cried, accused, name-called, tried to pull me in to defend him, tried to pull in his dad, lives 2 hours away, to defend him, tried to call my mom's sisters to defend him, claimed getting his own insurance was an emotional burden, claimed she needs professional help because she is obviously out of her mind, said that she obviously doesn't care about him, otherwise why would she so cruelly deprive him of such valuable resources? He went on and on for 3 hours, and she didn't budge. I don't want to get my hopes up that she'll stick to that 3-week deadline, but this is the closest she's come to evicting him. I hope this will scare him into leaving before she has to. The next story is titled, Karen gets arrested because I wasn't being a good cashier? So I used to work as a cashier in a supermarket. This story took place on my 4th day at work there, and my 2nd day working at a cash on my own without a supervisor sitting next to me, teaching me the ropes. Yes, I had 2 days of training. I'm sure most of you will figure out in which country I live for the following explanation. It'll become relevant later. Supermarkets in my country are a zoo on a regular day. However, Thursdays and Fridays are absolute mayhem at the store and are a special kind of hell. Fridays, the store closes 2 hours before sundown, as do most stores in the country. During winter, this means around 2 o'clock, and in summer, closer to 4:30. People get crazy on Fridays trying to get all their shopping done and get home in time to cook dinner. If you can avoid coming to the store on Friday, please do so at all costs. I always told people after this day. The reason Thursdays are hell is because we get all the customers who don't want to come on Friday. Now, this was early evening on a Thursday at a time when the store is absolutely jam-packed. We had 10 checkout lines open, and every line had at least 6 to 7 people in line. Basically, if you're stuck with a slow cashier, there is nowhere else to go unless you have 10 items or less. Everything is going well until I get a customer with 2 shopping carts full of items, mostly non-perishable items. And these are the large carts you find around big stores in the US, like Walmart. I found out later he buys this for a community center in his neighborhood and he fills up their party twice a year. Nice guy. He greeted me very politely and then said the most dreaded words I could have heard that night. This will be a delivery. Just a quick break from the story to explain why this was so dreaded, especially on a day like today. When we get a delivery, the cashier would call a helper from the store to help bag the groceries. Usually people do their own bagging. The bags would then be placed in plastic containers, and containers would then be placed on top of each other and taken to the back fridge until delivery. A regular delivery is usually between 3 to 5 crates. Each crate has a number, which then I have to input all of them into the computer along with correct delivery address and phone number, and print out with the receipt and place copies in the crates. Even for a small delivery, this always takes extra time. Back to the story. This guy has 2 full carts and wants a delivery. I say, sure, no problem. Then I turn to everyone else in line and let them know that this is a delivery and it will take just a bit longer than usual and apologize for any delay this may cause. We always do this so customers will be aware of the delay and can move to another cash if they are in a hurry. This is when the whole line groans simultaneously. I don't blame them, there was nowhere else to go. I could see every one of them craning their necks to check out other lines, and they all decided to stay, so I started scanning as fast as I can. I'm pretty good with numbers, so even though it's my 4th day, I remember many of the codes and things are moving rather quickly. I get to a point where the bagger can't keep up with all the items, and the area to the left of me, where I place all the scanned items, is just a mountain of cans and bags of chips and whatnot. I can't even scan another item because they're falling back onto my scale. At this point I stop and ask if he wants help bagging. The customer and the bagger are both appreciative, and I help bag groceries for a few minutes, just enough to clear some space so I can continue scanning items. This happens every few minutes. It gets full, I stop to help, clear some space, and keep going. This is where the Karen comes into play. She's maybe early 40s, long brown hair, and looks nothing like a Karen. Except for the way she was standing, with one hand on a hip that extended so far to the side I wasn't sure how she's still standing. She's in my line, about 5 to 6 people in front of her still. This is the conversation that follows. Karen: hello, what are you doing? Me, not answering, because I didn't think she was talking to me. I keep scanning. Karen: excuse me? What kind of a cashier are you? Why aren't you doing your job? Stop being lazy and do your job, she screams at the top of her lungs. Me: I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm just trying to... Karen: That's not your job. You are a cashier. Do your job. Do your job. I realize now, after reading so many Reddit stories, that this would have been a perfect chance for some malicious compliance. I'm sure some of you hope that I did just what Karen wanted. Too bad I didn't know about it then, or that it was only my 4th day on the job. That's not what happened, although I dream sometimes that I did just that. Sit back and sip my coffee until the space clears for more scanned items. You know, be a cashier next time. Me. I'm just helping to move things along faster. If this is a problem, or if you're in a hurry, feel free to move to another line. I'm sure another cashier will be more than happy to serve you. I may sound like I'm the a-hole with this line, but I said it really nicely, not sarcastic at all. Obviously that didn't help, lol. Karen, not listening anyway and having none of it. Just do your damn job! You are a cashier. What is wrong with you? Are you stupid? You should be fired. I stop listening at this point and don't answer as I'm still helping to bag and scan as fast as possible, knowing it's not gonna help anyway. However, I see one of my managers, let's call him Joe, walk up to Karen. Joe is great, by the way, always helping the workers. Joe, what seems to be the problem? Karen, still yelling. Your cashier is awful. She's lazy and she is not doing her job. You should fire her. Tell her to do her job. She's not doing her job. She repeated that a few times like a broken record. Joe looks over at me for a second, understands exactly what is happening, turns to Karen and says, "Can't you see she's trying to help?" She's trying to make this go so much faster. Now, Karen starts screaming words, I'm assuming, but I couldn't really make them out. She was practically foaming at the mouth. Joe tries to calm her down by explaining, or trying to, how me bagging items is actually helping, and this makes Karen even more irate, if you can believe it. Spit flying from her mouth, arms flailing, screaming like a banshee. Suddenly, I notice an older woman, nice old lady, must have been around 80 years old, trying to get Karen's attention by tapping her on the shoulder. It takes a few tries, but she finally gets her attention and spins her around by her shoulder. NOL. Hey, Karen? Karen? Excuse me? Karen! Karen. What? NOL. Your daughter is crying. This is when the entire store seemed to have stopped talking all at once, like someone pressed mute and turned off the volume. The sea of people in front of me parts a bit, and we all look down and see a little girl who couldn't have been older than 4, clutching her mother's thighs, bawling her eyes out, snot coming out of everywhere, hyperventilating. This girl was terrified, and I can't blame her. Seeing her mother going off like that must have been terrifying, and she has no idea what's happening. She's in a huge store where she knows no one, and she's practically invisible. This silence lasted an entire 2 seconds because that's when Karen started yelling at Joe. Karen, look what you did! You and your stupid lazy cashier made my daughter cry! And a bunch of other crazy sounds that were perhaps supposed to be words. Things happened in slow motion for the next few seconds. She starts to swing towards Joe. Joe's not a big guy, but he's bigger than Karen, that's for sure, and he's not easily intimidated. Not his first Karen. She would have decked him right in the face if the NOL hadn't grabbed her in a bear hug to stop her. Yes, she did. I had to pick up my jaw off the floor. At that point, other customers got involved, trying to peel off the NOL from Karen and stop Karen from trying to kill Joe, and from Joe trying to kill Karen because he was fuming by then. At this point, I saw mall security storm the castle. Our store was inside a mall, and the sea of people just surrounded Karen, and I couldn't really see much of anything anymore. Kind of like football players when there's a fumble and they all jump on the ball. By the sound of yelling getting farther and farther away, I figured Karen was being led either to the back office or to the mall security office, mall jail. This entire time this is happening, I'm still bagging and scanning items, and I'm about halfway through this customer's purchase. I finish up with him with no more problems. He was very nice and thanked me profusely for helping with the bags, even though technically it wasn't part of my job. He said I was the fastest and nicest cashier he had ever had the pleasure of meeting. I was just happy to help. No one else in my line complained. I actually got compliments from people about keeping my composure. Apparently many cashiers in my country think it's okay to yell at customers and just be plain nasty. I worked in customer service for many years prior, and I've never yelled at a customer, even if they deserved it. Once the rush died down a bit, I went for a break. I met another employee in the back room, and I started to tell him of what just happened when he cut me off. She was yelling at you? Ha ha ha! I heard that. Well, everyone heard that, but I had no idea what the fuck was happening. He told me that police was called and Karen escorted out of the store and the mall in handcuffs. I filled him in on everything and we spent the next 30 minutes laughing. I don't know what happened with the child. I'm assuming they called another family member to pick her up. I also don't know what happened with Karen after that, since I ended up working there for another year and I never saw her again. Hopefully she learned to do her grocery shopping on Tuesday/Wednesday, or was possibly in prison or house arrest. This was the first Karen I had the displeasure of meeting while working at that store, but definitely not the last. To those of you who read the entire story, thank you for sticking with me through to the end. I hope it was worth it and you got some sense of pleasure or justice from the end result. I'll work on my writing skills so the next story I may write, that may be long as well, will be easy and entertaining to read. The last story is titled, When I Was Away, My Neighbor Discarded My Classic Car Valued at $525,000. I've always lived in the same neighborhood and have seen all kinds of neighbors come and go. I've even had to deal with some Karen types in the past, so when Amy moved in next door, I was wary. However, she was always pleasant to me, and I thought I'd hit the neighbor jackpot. Amy would always say hello and even bring over baked goods once in a while. However, she had a reputation for being mean to everyone else in the neighborhood. One day I found myself in a bit of a predicament. My job required me to travel out of town regularly, and I had 3 cats and a dog that I needed to take care of. Putting them up in boarding each time was going to be expensive, and I didn't want them to be stuck in cages all day. That's when Amy offered to pet sit for me. I hesitated at first, but after seeing how great she was with her own dog, I decided to give her a chance. At first, everything was going smoothly. Amy seemed to genuinely love animals, and my pets seemed to enjoy her company. I paid her well for the job, and it was still cheaper than sending them to a boarding facility. Plus, it was a win-win situation. My pets were happy, and Amy got to make some extra cash. However, things took a turn for the worse when I came back from a trip and found my vintage 1967 Shelby GT500 missing from the garage. I couldn't believe it. I had spent years working on that car, and it was worth over $500,000. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. I had given Amy the key to my garage, and she must have used it to sell my car and parts to make some quick cash. I was furious and immediately confronted Amy, demanding an explanation for her actions. She was defensive at first, but then she admitted to selling my car and parts. She claimed that she deserved the money for pet sitting and other things she had done for me. I was livid, and my anger escalated when she refused to return the car and the parts to me. I knew I had to take legal action, but I was also concerned that I might not be able to recover my car. However, with the help of the police and the court, we were able to track down the car and get it back. The parts, however, were long gone. During the court proceedings, I found out that Amy had a history of financial problems and had even declared bankruptcy in the past. It all started to make sense why she had been so desperate for money. I couldn't believe that I had trusted her with my pets and garage key, and that she had taken advantage of me in such a terrible way. After the case was over, I thought that was the end of it. However, a few weeks later, I received a call from the police. They had found out that Amy had been involved in a car theft ring and had used my car as a way to gain the trust of other car owners in the area. She had even attempted to sell my car to a buyer who had been suspicious and had tipped off the police. Not only had Amy stolen my car and parts, but she had also been using it to commit other crimes. It was a nightmare scenario that I never could have imagined. I felt violated, and it took me a long time to feel safe in my own home again. In the end, I was glad that justice was served and Amy was sentenced to a long prison term for her crimes. However, the experience left me with a sense of paranoia and a distrust of people that I never had before. I realized that sometimes even the people who seem the nicest on the surface can turn out to be the worst. After that experience, I made sure to install cameras all around my property, and I became extra careful about who I let into my home. I also started volunteering with local organizations that help victims of financial scams and other crimes so that I could help others who had been through similar experiences. However, just when I thought I had put the whole ordeal behind me, I received another shocking call from the police. They informed me that they had found evidence that Amy had been planning to break into my home and rob me while I was away on my next trip. The thought of what could have happened if the police hadn't caught her in time makes me sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe that I had been so naive to trust her in the first place. The experience changed me in ways that I never could have imagined. It made me more vigilant, more cautious, and more aware of the dangers that can lurk in even the most unexpected places. However, it also gave me a new sense of purpose and a drive to help others who have been through similar experiences. In the end, I was able to recover my car and get justice for the crimes that were committed against me. However, the emotional toll of the experience will stay with me for a long time to come. I learned the hard way that you can never be too careful and that sometimes the people you least expect can be the most dangerous. The next story is titled, A Neighborly Dispute. I live in a small Midwestern town where the houses are spread out and the streets are quiet. I always loved the peacefulness of my neighborhood until a new neighbor moved in next door. His name was Jeff, and everyone called him A-hole. He was the type of guy who thought he was better than everyone else and loved to show off his expensive toys, like his lifted truck and motorcycle. It started with him racing down the street and locking his brakes to drift into his driveway. I didn't mind at first, but then he started hitting my mailbox every time he did it. I confronted him, but he denied it and blamed it on delivery drivers. I let it go, but it kept happening. I decided to take matters into my own hands and built a new mailbox out of scrap steel plate and an old railroad track post. I sunk it 4 feet into the ground and disguised it with cedar shingles. I waited for weeks for Jeff to hit it again, but he never did. I had almost forgotten about it until one night I heard a loud crash outside. I ran outside and saw Jeff's truck smashed up against my mailbox. He started yelling at me, saying I had destroyed his truck and he was going to make me pay for it. He even called the cops. When the cop arrived, Jeff tried to play the victim and said I had built the mailbox to destroy his truck. I was nervous, but then the cop asked if I had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained that it had been hit several times in the past year. The cop then issued Jeff 2 tickets for reckless driving and wanton destruction of property. Jeff was furious and threatened to get revenge on me. I was scared, but I didn't think he would actually do anything. I was wrong. A few weeks later, I came home to find my house had been vandalized. The windows were broken, the lawn was torn up, and there was graffiti on the walls. I called the cops, but they couldn't find any evidence. I decided to take matters into my own hands again and set up a camera to catch Jeff in the act. It took a few weeks, but I finally caught him trying to break into my house. I called the cops and they arrested him. Jeff was charged with vandalism and attempted burglary. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail and had to pay for all the damage he had caused. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that justice had been served. I also added a few extra security measures to my home to make sure it never happened again. However, things didn't end there. After Jeff was released from jail, he began to harass me and my family. He would throw rocks at our windows, leave threatening messages on our doorstep, and even follow us when we went out. I tried to ignore it at first, but it just kept getting worse. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since Jeff hadn't technically broken any laws yet. I felt helpless and scared. I didn't know what to do. One day, as I was leaving for work, I saw Jeff's truck parked outside my house. I tried to drive away, but he blocked me in. He got out of his truck and started walking towards me, holding something in his hand. I didn't know what it was, but it looked sharp. I panicked and hit the gas, driving my car into his truck and knocking him down. I didn't mean to hurt him, but I was so scared and didn't know what else to do. I drove away as fast as I could and called the cops. They arrived quickly and arrested Jeff. It turned out he had a knife in his hand when he approached me. He was charged with attempted assault and harassment. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and had to pay for the damages to my car and his truck. After the incident, I felt a mix of emotions. I was relieved that Jeff was finally behind bars, but I was also traumatized by the whole experience. I began to feel paranoid and anxious all the time, always looking over my shoulder and worrying that Jeff or someone else would come after me. I decided to seek therapy to help me deal with my anxiety and fear. It wasn't easy, but over time I began to feel more like myself again. I also took some self-defense classes and invested in a home security system to make sure my family and I were safe. As for Jeff, I heard through the grapevine that he was released from prison and had moved out of town. I was glad to hear that he was gone, but I still felt uneasy. I knew that I would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if he or someone like him would come after me again. Years went by and I started to feel like I could finally put the whole ordeal behind me. That was until I received a letter in the mail from Jeff. In the letter, he apologized for what he had done and said that he had turned his life around while in prison. He asked for my forgiveness and said that he wanted to make things right. At first, I was skeptical. I didn't know if I could trust him, but something about the letter seemed genuine. I decided to give him a chance and agreed to meet with him in person. When we met, I could see that Jeff was a changed man. He was humble and remorseful, and he seemed genuinely interested in making amends. We talked for hours, and I could feel my anger and fear slowly melting away. In the end, Jeff and I were able to come to an understanding. He agreed to pay for the damages he had caused, and he even helped me fix up my house after the vandalism. We never became best friends, but we were able to coexist peacefully. Update. It's been 10 years since Jeff and I had our falling out, and I'm happy to say that we've both moved on from the experience. Jeff went on to become a successful businessman and even started a charity to help people who were struggling with addiction, which was the root cause of his past behavior. As for me, I'm still living in the same house, but I've made some changes to my lifestyle. I'm more cautious now, and I make sure to always lock my doors and windows. I've also become more active in my community, working with local organizations to make our town a safer and more welcoming place for everyone. Overall, I've learned that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to find common ground and move forward. I'm grateful for the lessons I learned from my experience with Jeff, and I'm proud to say that I've come out stronger on the other side. In my opinion, this story was an intense ride that kept me on the edge of my seat. It's hard to imagine going through something like that with a neighbor, but the author did a great job of making it feel real and believable. The added dramatic ending was unexpected and added an extra layer of excitement. The update at the end was a nice touch, and it was reassuring to hear that the author was able to find closure and move on from the experience. The next story is titled, Neighbor Enjoyed Parking in My Driveway. I Wrapped Her Car in Black Film to Teach Her a Lesson. Living in a densely populated city meant that parking was always a challenge. My neighborhood had limited parking spots, and with 29 houses and 23 parking spots, it was tough to find a spot to park. Some households had driveways, but even then it was frustrating when someone blocked them. My family was a family of 4, and we only had 2 cars between us, which was perfect for our driveway. However, one day, a black car parked in front of our driveway, blocking our access. We thought it was a one-time thing, but the car kept returning every few days, blocking our driveway. We couldn't even pull into our driveway after a long day of being out and about. After several attempts to catch the driver and asking them to stop parking in front of our driveway, I had enough. I decided to take matters into my own hands and teach them a lesson. I wrapped their car in a giant roll of black film that I had in my garage. Although I didn't want to cause any damage to the car, I wanted to send a message loud and clear. The next morning, the driver came knocking on my door, and I was expecting a heated confrontation. However, she was very apologetic and explained that she was trying to sell her old car and didn't have space in front of her house to park. We came to an understanding and she agreed to stop parking in front of our driveway, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I noticed that the same car had parked in front of my neighbor's driveway. I approached my neighbor, and she told me that the same driver had been parking in front of her driveway, blocking her access as well. We decided to work together to solve the issue. We put up a sign that said, "No parking," and we started to monitor the area. We saw the driver approach and park in front of my neighbor's driveway, but this time we were prepared. We walked up to her, explained the situation, and told her to move her car. She seemed embarrassed and promised to never do it again, but that still wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, I noticed that the same driver had parked in front of another neighbor's driveway. I approached the neighbor, and she was furious. She had missed an important appointment because she couldn't get out of her driveway. Together, we decided to take legal action. We filed a complaint with the city, and they took action. They put up no parking signs on the street, and they started monitoring the area more closely. The driver was fined, and she eventually stopped parking in front of our driveways. Update. It's been a few months since the incident, and we haven't had any issues with parking in front of our driveways. My neighbor and I have become good friends, and we often talk about the time we had to take legal action against the driver who kept parking in front of our driveways. It just goes to show that sometimes you have to take drastic measures to get the results you want. But in the end, it was worth it because we were able to protect our property and keep our driveways accessible. In my opinion, this story really captures the frustration that can come with living in a densely populated city. It's easy to understand why the author would be upset about someone constantly blocking their driveway. While the solution of wrapping the car in plastic may seem extreme, it's understandable why the author felt the need to take action. It's great to see that the situation was ultimately resolved without any long-term animosity between the neighbors. The next story is titled, Overcoming a Car Scam and Fighting for Consumer Rights. Growing up, I never had much interest in cars. I was a typical teenage girl, more focused on hanging out with friends and going to concerts than worrying about the mechanics of my vehicle. But as I got older, I realized that I needed to take care of my car if I wanted it to last. So I started learning more about cars from my dad and brother, both of whom are mechanics. One day I decided to take my car in for an oil change and a free inspection at a local auto shop. I knew my car was in good shape because I had just replaced the air filter and brake pads. But when the mechanic came back with a serious expression and a long list of repairs totaling $1,500, including new brake pads, rotors and calipers, a new serpentine belt, air filter, and compressor, I was taken aback. He even showed me my air filter, which was filled with dirt, dead grass, and a dead wasp. But I knew for a fact that I had just replaced it. Instead of confronting the mechanic right away, I decided to buy myself some time and called my dad to play along. I acted like I was crying and begged for his help while the mechanic stood there smugly, thinking he had me fooled. But my dad was in on the plan and played along perfectly, even asking the mechanic to repeat the list of repairs. Once the mechanic handed me back my phone, I dropped the act and started laughing hysterically. My dad and I were cracking up while the mechanic stood there, red-faced and stuttering. I handed him back the air filter and told him to vacuum it out and let me see it before he put it back in. But as I watched him put the filter back in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, I noticed that my car was making a strange noise. I took it to another auto shop for a second opinion, and the mechanic there told me that the previous mechanic had messed with my car. He showed me how the air filter had been tampered with, and how the mechanic had put in an old, worn-out belt instead of a new one. The second mechanic told me that the original mechanic had probably done this to create more work and make more money off of me. I was outraged. I couldn't believe that someone would do something like that just to make a quick buck. I decided to take action and report the original mechanic to the Better Business Bureau and my state's Attorney General's office. It was a long and arduous process, but I was determined to fight for my rights as a consumer. Months went by, and I thought I had put the incident behind me. But then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the State Attorney General's office informing me that they had taken action against the auto shop and the mechanic who had scammed me. The shop had been fined and the mechanic had lost his license to practice. I was overjoyed. Finally, justice had been served. But I didn't stop there. I decided to use my experience to help others who might be in similar situations. I started a blog about car maintenance and consumer rights, sharing my own story and offering advice to others. My blog quickly gained a following, and I was soon contacted by a local news station who wanted to do a story about my experience. The news story aired on prime time, and the response was overwhelming. Many people reached out to me, sharing their own stories of being scammed by auto mechanics and expressing their gratitude for my willingness to speak out. Some even started their own consumer advocacy groups inspired by my story, and together we started fighting for our rights as consumers. With this newfound sense of purpose, I began attending town hall meetings and speaking with lawmakers about the need for stricter regulations on auto shops and mechanics. I even started volunteering with a local nonprofit organization that helped low-income families with car repairs. But despite all of this progress, I still couldn't shake the feeling of anger and betrayal that I felt toward the original mechanic who had scammed me. So one day I decided to confront him. I went back to the auto shop and demanded to speak with him. At first, he tried to deny that he had done anything wrong, but when I showed him the letter from the Attorney General's office, he broke down and admitted to everything. He told me that he was struggling financially and had made a mistake by trying to scam me. He apologized and begged for my forgiveness. I was torn. Part of me wanted to forgive him, knowing that he was just trying to make ends meet. But another part of me was still angry and hurt by what he had done. In the end, I decided to forgive him, but only after he promised to go through a program to learn how to run an honest business and to never scam anyone again. Years have passed since that fateful day at the auto shop, and I am happy to say that I have continued to fight for consumer rights and to help others avoid being scammed by dishonest mechanics. The nonprofit organization that I volunteer with has grown, and we have been able to help countless families with car repairs. And the auto shop that once scammed me has since changed ownership and has become a reputable and honest business. But the most exciting update came just last week when I received a call from a state senator who had read my blog and wanted me to testify in front of a congressional committee on consumer protection. I eagerly accepted and traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak on behalf of all consumers who have been scammed by dishonest auto mechanics. In the end, my experience taught me the power of speaking out and fighting for what is right. I may have been just one person, but by sharing my story and using my voice, I was able to make a real difference in the lives of others. In my opinion, this story was both inspiring and informative. It's unfortunate that there are mechanics out there who try to take advantage of people who don't know much about cars. But it's heartening to see that there are people like the author who are willing to fight back against injustice. I particularly appreciated how the author used their experience to help others and to advocate for consumer rights. It's always great to see someone turn a negative experience into a positive outcome. The last story is titled, Confronting My Neighbor's Ongoing Harassment. When I first moved into my house, I was thrilled. Finally, I had my own space, my own backyard, and my own dog, a young and energetic husky named Luna. But as soon as I began settling in, I noticed that my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was not happy about my presence. She would always give me nasty looks, and I overheard her complaining to other neighbors about the noise Luna would make. But it didn't stop there. One day I found a note taped to my door, telling me to keep my dog quiet or else. Then, a few days later, I woke up to find a bag of dog food on my front porch, along with instructions on how to feed my dog. I found it strange, but I figured Mrs. Thompson just wanted to help. However, things only got worse from there. On several occasions, I found Luna loose in my backyard with the gate open. I suspected Mrs. Thompson had let her out, but I had no proof. Then, I caught her feeding my dog on my own property without my permission. I was furious, and I decided enough was enough. I decided to confront her. I gathered all the evidence I had and marched across the street to her house. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, I said, "Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you about your ongoing harassment of me and my dog." She looked at me, feigning innocence. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." I knew she was lying. I took a deep breath and continued. "I have pictures and evidence of the notes, the dog food, the trespassing, and the times you've let my dog out." She stared at me for a moment and then sighed. "Okay, fine, I've been upset about the noise, but I never intended to hurt your dog. I was just trying to help." I shook my head. "I appreciate your concern, but your actions are not helping. My dog is healthy, and I've consulted with my vet about her care. You need to stop." She nodded, and we parted ways. For a while, things seemed to be okay. Luna was no longer getting out, and I didn't see Mrs. Thompson as much. But then, one day, I came home to find a citation on my door from Animal Control. They had received a report of animal neglect and had come to investigate. I was furious. I called them right away, and after presenting them with Luna's vet records and a statement from my neighbors, they agreed that there was no neglect. But I knew it was Mrs. Thompson who had called them. I decided to confront her once again. This time, I was not as calm. I marched across the street, banging on her door until she answered. I showed her the citation, and she feigned ignorance. I didn't call them, I swear. But I didn't believe her. I told her she needed to stop, or I would take legal action. And then, to my surprise, she broke down in tears. She revealed to me that she had recently lost her own dog, and that seeing Luna reminded her of her loss. She apologized for her behavior and promised to leave us alone. After that, things improved significantly. I no longer felt like I was being watched all the time, and Luna was happy to play in the yard without any disturbances. However, several months later, Mrs. Thompson passed away from natural causes. It was a shock to us all, but I felt a sense of relief that the ongoing conflict had finally come to an end. Update. After Mrs. Thompson passed away, her son reached out to me to offer his condolences. We had never spoken before, and I was surprised by his kindness. He told me that his mother had been going through a tough time before her death, and that she had been struggling to cope with her loss. I felt a pang of guilt for being so harsh with her, knowing now that she was just in pain. But then he surprised me even more. He told me that his mother had left something for me in her will. I was shocked and a little uneasy. I didn't want to benefit from her death, but I decided to hear him out. He told me that his mother had left a letter, apologizing for her behavior and asking for my forgiveness. She also left me a small sum of money, which she had set aside for the care of my dog. She had included a note telling me to take Luna on a trip and to enjoy our time together. I was moved by her gesture and felt a sense of closure. I realized that Mrs. Thompson had not been a villain, but a lonely woman who was struggling to cope with her grief. I decided to honor her memory by taking Luna on a trip to a nearby state park. It was a beautiful day, and Luna had the time of her life, running and playing in the sun. As we drove back home, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the unexpected gift that Mrs. Thompson had left us. I had learned a valuable lesson about compassion and forgiveness, and I had been reminded of the healing power of kindness. From that day on, I made an effort to be more understanding and patient with my neighbors, and to always approach conflicts with an open mind. Another update. It's been a year since Mrs. Thompson's passing, and I still think about her from time to time. Her son has moved away, and the house next door has new tenants. Luna is still my faithful companion, and we often take trips to the park to enjoy the outdoors. I've made peace with the past, and I'm grateful for the lessons that it has taught me. In my opinion, this story was a great reminder that conflicts with neighbors can often be resolved through communication and understanding. It's easy to jump to conclusions and assume the worst about people, but it's important to remember that everyone has their own struggles and challenges. I was touched by Mrs. Thompson's gesture, and it made me think about how we can all make a difference in someone's life, even in small ways. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.